8 months pregnant, bleeding knees, broken champagne glasses scattered across a marble floor. Rebecca Harrison never imagined her Harvard MBA would prepare her for this moment, crawling across jagged crystal while her husband's mistress watched from his leather chair, both women carrying his children. But what Marcus Harrison didn't know was that someone else was watching too. Someone with a camera, someone who'd been waiting 15 years for the right moment to act. The night janitor who cleaned the executive offices had seen 3 wives come and go, each one broken, each one silenced, each one disappeared with sealed court documents and hefty payoffs. This time would be different, because Eugene Martinez wasn't just cleaning offices that night. He was collecting evidence. Evidence that would bring down a CEO who thought his money could buy him the right to destroy women. What started as an anniversary dinner from hell would end with a 40-year prison sentence and a video that prosecutors called the most damning piece of evidence they'd ever seen. But first, Rebecca had to survive the night. She had to find the courage to stand up. And she had to discover that sometimes the most unlikely heroes come from the most unexpected places. This is the story of how a pregnant woman's darkest hour became a powerful man's worst nightmare. How broken glass became the evidence that shattered his carefully constructed lies. And how a janitor's bravery saved 2 lives and brought justice to victims who thought they'd never be heard. You won't believe what happens when the truth finally comes to light. Glass shattered against marble, muffled sobbing, then silence. Rebecca Harrison sat in her Honda Civic outside the police station, her 8 months pregnant belly pressed against the steering wheel. The phone trembled in her hands. She watched the video for the 7th time. There she was, crawling across broken champagne glasses, while Marcus screamed at her to apologize properly to Tiffany. The worst part wasn't the blood on her knees. It was the sound of her dignity breaking with every piece of glass that cut through her maternity dress. 3 hours ago, she'd been organizing baby clothes in the nursery, folding tiny onesies with the same precision she'd once used for marketing presentations. Before Marcus made her quit, before he convinced her that staying home was what good wives did, the knock on the front door had startled her. She'd opened it to find Eugene Martinez, the night janitor from Marcus's office building. His weathered hands held a small USB drive. "Mrs. Harrison," he'd said in his quiet voice, "I think you need to see this." Eugene had worked nights at Harrison Industries for 15 years. He'd watched Marcus rise from junior executive to CEO. He'd also watched 3 wives come and go, each one disappearing with sealed court documents and hefty bank transfers. But this time was different. This time, there was a baby involved. Rebecca had taken the drive with shaking hands. Eugene's dark eyes held a sadness that made her stomach clench. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison," he'd whispered. "I should have acted sooner." Now, sitting in her car, Rebecca understood what he meant. The video was time-stamped 3 weeks ago. Marcus's home office. The anniversary dinner that had gone so terribly wrong. She closed her eyes, but she could still hear Marcus's voice from the recording. "Get on your knees, Rebecca. Show Tiffany the respect she deserves." Her pregnant body heavy and awkward, lowering to the floor. The champagne glasses Marcus had swept from his desk, creating a jagged carpet of crystal. Crawl to her. Tell her you're sorry for being such a boring wife. The memory made her throat burn. She'd done it. God help her. She'd crawled across that glass while Tiffany Walsh sat in Marcus's leather chair, her own pregnant belly visible beneath her designer dress. Rebecca touched her phone screen. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock. She couldn't stop the nervous habit. 3 times. Always 3 times. It drove Marcus crazy, which was probably why she kept doing it. The passenger door opened. Detective Ryan Cooper slid into the seat, his gray suit rumpled from a long day. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 41, with kind eyes that had seen too much. "Mrs. Harrison," he asked. "I'm Detective Cooper. We've been expecting you." Rebecca's voice came out as a whisper. "I have something to show you." She handed him the phone. Detective Cooper took it carefully, as if he understood it contained something precious and terrible. "Before you watch this," Rebecca said, "I need you to know something. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. I know what happened to me." The detective's expression remained neutral, but his fingers tightened slightly around the phone. "Mrs. Harrison, why don't we go inside where it's more comfortable?" You can tell me everything. Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. 8 months of pregnancy, and still Marcus's child. The thought made her sick. Will this be enough? She asked. The video. I mean, will it be enough to stop him? Detective Cooper's jaw tightened as he glanced at the phone screen. Ma'am, I haven't watched it yet, but if what you're telling me is true, we're going to do everything we can to make sure he faces consequences. Rebecca took a deep breath. The October air was cold, carrying the scent of dying leaves. Soon, her daughter would breathe this same air. The thought gave her strength. She opened the car door. There is something else you need to know. Detective, this wasn't the first time. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. Rebecca sat across from Detective Cooper in a small interview room, fluorescent lights humming overhead. A female officer, Detective Lisa Park, joined them, offering Rebecca a cup of herbal tea. Take your time, Mrs. Harrison, Detective Cooper said, setting up a recording device. Start wherever feels comfortable. Rebecca stared at the tea, watching steam rise from the surface. How did she explain how a Harvard MBA with a successful marketing career ended up crawling on broken glass for her husband's mistress? I met Marcus 6 years ago at a networking event, she began. He was charming, confident. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. The words felt strange in her mouth. She'd told this story before, to friends, to her mother, always with a smile. The fairy tale version. The first red flag was so small I almost missed it, Rebecca continued. He didn't like my best friend, Linda. Said she was jealous of our relationship, trying to poison me against him. Detective Park leaned forward slightly. Did you stop seeing Linda? Not at first, but Marcus was subtle about it. He'd plan romantic dates whenever Linda wanted to meet up, or he'd get upset if I talked to her too long on the phone. Eventually, it became easier to just drift away from her. Rebecca's voice caught. Linda Carter had been her roommate in college, her maid of honor, her closest friend, until Marcus made maintaining that friendship exhausting. What about your family? Detective Cooper asked. My parents live in Seattle. Marcus encouraged me to quit my job and move to Chicago with him. Said he made enough for both of us, that I should focus on being happy instead of stressed about work deadlines. She remembered feeling grateful. Marcus made it sound like he was rescuing her from a life of corporate drudgery. What she hadn't realized was that financial independence was the first thing he took away. The joint bank accounts came next, Rebecca said. He said it was romantic, sharing everything, but somehow, I never had the passwords. When I asked for spending money, he'd give me cash like I was a child receiving an allowance. Detective Park exchanged a look with her partner. Mrs. Harrison, when did the physical abuse start? Rebecca's hand moved to her wedding ring, a habit she'd developed over the years. Twist, twist, twist. It started small, a grab that left bruises, a shove when I disagreed with him. He'd always apologize afterward, bring me flowers, take me to dinner. Said work stress was making him short-tempered. The pattern was so clear now. How had she missed it for so long? The first time he hit me was 2 years ago. I'd made dinner plans with a coworker without asking his permission first. He backhanded me across the face, then cried and begged forgiveness. Said his father used to hit his mother, and he was terrified he was turning into the same monster. Did you consider leaving? Detective Cooper asked gently. Rebecca let out a bitter laugh. With what money he'd convinced me to put his name on everything. My car, the apartment lease, even my phone plan. I had no credit cards, no savings account he couldn't access. I was completely dependent on him. The worst part was how gradually it had happened, like slowly turning up the heat on a frog in water. By the time she realized she was trapped, escaping felt impossible. When did you find out about Tiffany Walsh? Detective Park asked. Rebecca's jaw tightened. 6 months ago, I was looking for my prenatal vitamins in his desk drawer and found receipts, expensive dinners, jewelry, a hotel room, all charged to his company credit card. She'd confronted him that night. Marcus had been calm, almost amused by her distress. He didn't deny it, Rebecca said. He laughed, said I'd gotten fat and boring since the pregnancy, that he needed someone who appreciated him. Then he told me if I ever brought it up again, he'd make sure I lost custody of the baby. How did he threaten to do that? Detective Cooper asked. Money. Lawyers. He said no judge would give a child to an unemployed woman with no family support. He'd paint me as mentally unstable, maybe even claim I was abusing drugs. Rebecca's voice grew stronger. The crawling incident happened 3 weeks ago. It was our wedding anniversary. Marcus had brought Tiffany to the house for dinner, said she was his associate, and I needed to be polite. She closed her eyes, remembering. I served them a meal I'd spent all day preparing. Tiffany made snide comments about the food, the house, my appearance. She said I looked tired, that pregnancy didn't suit me. What happened next? I finally snapped. I told her she had no right to come into my home and insult me. That's when Marcus got angry. Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. He swept all the champagne glasses off his desk onto the floor. Told me I needed to apologize properly to Tiffany for being such a terrible hostess. And that's when he made you crawl. He said if I wanted to act like an animal, I could crawl like one. Made me get on my hands and knees and crawl across the broken glass to where Tiffany was sitting. I had to apologize for each insult while blood soaked through my dress. Detective Park's pen had stopped moving. Mrs. Harrison, how many times would you say your husband has physically abused you? Rebecca thought about it. Really thought about it. If we're talking about obvious hits and shoves, maybe 20 times over 4 years. But if we're counting every grab, every painful squeeze, every time he cornered me against a wall, she paused. Hundreds, maybe more. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. There's something else you need to know, Rebecca said. 3 weeks ago wasn't the first time he made me crawl. It was just the first time someone recorded it. Detective Cooper leaned forward. There have been other incidents. Many others. Making me crawl to apologize was Marcus's favorite punishment. He said it reminded me of my place in the relationship. Rebecca's hand moved to her belly as the baby kicked. Strong kicks, like her daughter was already fighting. But this time was different, she continued. This time, Tiffany was there, and she was pregnant too. The detectives exchanged another look. Mrs. Harrison, Detective Park said carefully, are you telling us your husband is expecting a child with his mistress? Rebecca nodded. She's about 5 months along. Marcus is planning to divorce me after the baby is born and marry her. The crawling incident. It wasn't punishment. It was initiation. He was showing her how he'd trained me to submit, so she'd know what to expect as his next wife. Detective Cooper's voice was tight when he spoke. Mrs. Harrison, I need to tell you something. There's more on that video than just the crawling incident. The camera kept recording after you left the room. Rebecca's blood went cold. What did it show? Your husband and Miss Walsh discussing their plans for after the divorce, including some very specific threats about what would happen to you if you tried to interfere with their relationship? The baby kicked again, harder this time. They were planning to kill me, weren't they? Rebecca asked. Detective Cooper's silence was answer enough. Rebecca stared at the white ceiling tiles of the interview room, her mind reeling. The fluorescent light above her left eye flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced like memories. 6 years ago, she'd been Rebecca Matthews, marketing director at a thriving Chicago firm. She'd had her own apartment in Lincoln Park, a reliable car, and a savings account that made her feel secure. She'd been proud of herself, proud of what she'd built from nothing. Marcus Harrison had walked into her life like a prince from a fairy tale. Tell me about the early days, Detective Park said gently. When did you first realize something was wrong? Rebecca closed her eyes, letting herself remember. The wedding planning, that should have been my first real warning. She'd wanted something small. Beach ceremony, maybe 50 guests. Marcus had different ideas. He said his position required a certain kind of wedding. 300 guests, most of them his business associates. A venue that cost more than I made in 2 years. Rebecca's voice grew distant. When I suggested we split the cost, he looked at me like I'd grown a second head. The memory was sharp now. Marcus in his perfectly tailored suit, explaining why her preferences were unrealistic. He said successful men's wives didn't worry about money, that my job was to look beautiful and let him handle the finances. He made it sound romantic, like he was protecting me from stress. But control dressed up as protection was still control. Our honeymoon was when I first saw his temper, Rebecca continued. We were in Italy. I wanted to visit a small museum I'd read about, but Marcus had already booked us for a wine tasting. When I suggested we skip the tasting, he grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks. Detective Cooper made a note. Did he apologize? Immediately. He cried, said he was overwhelmed with work stress, that he'd never hurt me again. Bought me an expensive bracelet to cover the bruises. The pattern had been established from the beginning. Violence followed by remorse. Gifts to cover the evidence. The isolation started gradually. First, he'd pout when I made plans without him. Then he'd get angry, accuse me of not wanting to spend time with him. Eventually, it became easier to just include him in everything. Rebecca opened her eyes, focusing on Detective Park's kind face. He was so charming with my friends. They all thought he was wonderful. When I tried to talk to them about small things that bothered me, they'd say I was lucky to have such a devoted husband. Even her mother had fallen under Marcus's spell. He'd call her every week, send flowers on her birthday, treat her like the mother he'd always wanted. When did you stop working? Detective Cooper asked. 8 months after the wedding. Marcus said the stress of my job was affecting our relationship, that I seemed tired all the time, that I wasn't present when we were together. Rebecca had loved her job, the creative challenges, the team meetings, the satisfaction of a successful campaign launch. Marcus had systematically destroyed her confidence in her abilities. He'd critique everything. The way I dressed for work, the hours I kept, the energy I brought home. When a big client rejected one of my proposals, Marcus said maybe it was a sign that I wasn't cut out for the corporate world. The gaslighting had been subtle but constant. A comment here, a suggestion there, all delivered with concern for her well-being. The final straw was when he started showing up at my office unannounced. He'd bring lunch, flowers, small gifts. My coworkers thought it was sweet, but I could feel him watching me interact with my male colleagues. One day, Marcus had cornered her boss and suggested that Rebecca seemed overwhelmed, that she'd been making mistakes. None of it was true, but the seed of doubt had been planted. When I got passed over for a promotion I deserved, Marcus said it was the universe telling us I should focus on being a wife. He made quitting sound like my idea. Rebecca's hand moved to her belly as the baby shifted. I thought I was choosing love over career ambition. I didn't realize I was choosing dependence over independence. The first year of unemployment had been strange. Marcus encouraged her to redecorate the house, take up hobbies, volunteer at charities. She'd felt purposeless but tried to convince herself she was adjusting to married life. When did you start trying for a baby? Detective Park asked. Rebecca's expression darkened. I wasn't trying. Marcus was. She remembered the conversation like it was yesterday. Marcus informing her, not asking her, that they'd start a family. When she'd suggested waiting a few more years, he'd exploded. He said children would give me purpose, that I'd been moping around the house like a ghost since quitting work. When I mentioned maybe going back to work part-time, he accused me of not wanting to be a mother. The reproductive coercion had started subtly. Marcus monitoring her cycle, pressuring her when she was ovulating, guilt-tripping her when she wanted to use protection. I finally got pregnant 8 months ago. I thought maybe a baby would fix things between us, give us something positive to focus on. Instead, the pregnancy had made everything worse. Marcus became obsessed with controlling every aspect of my pregnancy. He chose my doctor, monitored my weight gain, decided what I could and couldn't eat. When I suggested taking a prenatal yoga class, he said exercise might hurt the baby. Rebecca's voice grew stronger, anger creeping in. He wouldn't let me drive myself to appointments, said pregnant women were accident-prone, but really, he was tracking my every movement. The isolation had become complete. No job, no friends, no independent transportation. Rebecca had become a prisoner in her own home. The worst part was how he talked about the baby, Rebecca said, like she was his property. He'd put his hand on my belly and say things like, "Daddy's little princess," or "You're going to be just as beautiful as Mommy when she was younger." The implication was clear. Rebecca was getting older, less attractive, less valuable. The baby would be Marcus's fresh start. When did you first suspect the affair? Detective Cooper asked. 3 months ago. He started working late every night, taking weekend business trips. But the real giveaway was how happy he seemed. Marcus had been whistling around the house, buying new clothes, working out regularly, all the signs of a man falling in love. I confronted him about it. He called me paranoid and hormonal, said pregnancy was making me irrational, that I should focus on taking care of our baby instead of inventing problems. But Rebecca's instincts had been right. The receipts she'd found painted a clear picture of an ongoing affair. Expensive dinners at romantic restaurants, jewelry purchases, hotel rooms charged to his company card. When I showed him the receipts, he didn't even pretend to be sorry. He said I'd let myself go during the pregnancy, that he needed companionship from someone who still cared about her appearance. The cruelty of it had taken Rebecca's breath away. She was carrying his child, and he was punishing her for the physical changes that came with pregnancy. That night, he brought Tiffany to the house for the first time, said I needed to meet the woman who would be helping him through this difficult period in our marriage. Rebecca's voice turned hollow. Tiffany was everything I used to be. Confident, successful, beautiful. She looked at me like I was something pitiful, something broken that Marcus was too kind to throw away. The three-way dinner had been a nightmare of passive-aggressive comments and barely veiled insults. Marcus had sat back and watched as Tiffany systematically dismantled Rebecca's self-worth. She made comments about the house being dusty, the meal being oversalted, my appearance being unkempt. Marcus agreed with everything she said. By the end of the evening, I felt like a servant in my own home. That was the night Marcus had first made Rebecca crawl. Not across broken glass, not yet, but across the living room floor to apologize to Tiffany for being a poor hostess. He said if I wanted to act like a victim, I could crawl like one. Made me get on my hands and knees and beg Tiffany's forgiveness while my pregnant belly dragged against the carpet. Rebecca's hand clenched into a fist. I did it. I crawled across my own living room floor and apologized to my husband's mistress for existing. The room fell silent. Detective Park's pen had stopped moving again. That should have been my breaking point, Rebecca whispered. But I was so scared, so isolated, so convinced I had nowhere to go. I thought if I could just be a better wife, if I could just make him happy again. She trailed off, the futility of those thoughts crushing her even now. Mrs. Harrison, Detective Cooper said carefully, you mentioned this wasn't Marcus's first marriage. What do you know about his previous wives? Rebecca's eyes sharpened. I know there were 3 of them. I know they all signed non-disclosure agreements when they divorced him, and I know they all disappeared completely from Chicago society after the settlements. She'd tried to find them, of course, but Marcus's lawyers had been thorough. No social media presence, no forwarding addresses, no mutual friends willing to make introductions. I think he's done this before, Rebecca said quietly. The isolation, the control, the systematic destruction of self-worth. I think I'm just the latest in a long line of women Marcus Harrison has broken. Detective Cooper leaned forward. Mrs. Harrison, what made you finally decide to come forward now? Rebecca's hand moved to her belly one more time. 3 weeks ago, when he made me crawl across that broken glass, something inside me snapped. Not because of what he was doing to me, but because of what he was planning to do to her. The baby kicked as if responding to her mother's voice. I realized that if I didn't fight back now, my daughter would grow up thinking this was normal, that women exist to be broken by men like her father, and I couldn't let that happen. Rebecca's voice grew stronger with each word. I was willing to sacrifice myself to keep the peace, but I will not sacrifice my daughter to perpetuate the cycle. Detective Cooper slid 3 manila folders across the table. The names on the tabs were covered with white stickers, but Rebecca could see the dates 2010, 2012, 2013, 2015, 2016, 2018. These are Marcus's previous wives, Detective Cooper said. We've been building a case file for the past 6 months. Rebecca's hands trembled as she opened the first folder. Sarah Elizabeth Connor, married to Marcus Harrison from 2010 to 2012. The photos showed a vibrant woman in her late 20s with auburn hair and bright green eyes. By the final photo, taken during the divorce proceedings, she looked hollow-eyed and skeletal. Sarah was a pediatric nurse when she met Marcus, Detective Park explained. She quit her job 6 months after the wedding to focus on starting a family. Rebecca studied the medical records included in the file: emergency room visits for suspicious injuries, miscarriages that coincided with documented domestic disputes, psychiatric evaluations that painted Sarah as unstable and delusional. She tried to press charges twice, Detective Cooper continued. Both times, Marcus's lawyers got the charges dropped due to insufficient evidence. The divorce settlement was staggering: $2.5 million in exchange for Sarah's silence and immediate relocation to another state. The non-disclosure agreement was 20 pages long. "Where is she now?" Rebecca asked. "Portland, Oregon. She works part-time as a school nurse under her maiden name. No social media presence. No contact with anyone from her Chicago life." Rebecca opened the second folder. Amanda Rose Patterson, married to Marcus Harrison from 2013 to 2015. Another beautiful woman destroyed by systematic abuse. Amanda was a realtor, Detective Park said. Very successful, made more money than Marcus when they first met. By the time she divorced him, she had no career, no confidence, and a documented history of anxiety and depression. The pattern was identical: isolation, financial control, escalating physical abuse disguised as discipline for Amanda's perceived failures as a wife. "The crawling started with Amanda," Detective Cooper said grimly. "The private investigator we hired found security footage from Marcus's home office. Hours of video showing Amanda being forced to crawl across various surfaces as punishment for minor infractions." Rebecca's stomach turned. Hours. Marcus was escalating his methods. With Sarah, the abuse was more traditional: hitting, shoving, emotional manipulation. But with Amanda, he developed a systematic approach to breaking down her dignity. The third folder contained Jennifer Marie Walsh. Rebecca's blood went cold. "Walsh," she whispered. "Like Tiffany Walsh." Detective Park nodded grimly. "Jennifer is Tiffany's older sister. She was married to Marcus from 2016 to 2018. The room spun around Rebecca. Tiffany's sister was married to Marcus. Jennifer was a marketing executive when she met Marcus. Sound familiar? He used the same playbook every time: charm offensive, gradual isolation, financial control, then systematic physical and psychological abuse." Rebecca stared at Jennifer's photos. The resemblance to Tiffany was unmistakable. Same blonde hair, same blue eyes, same delicate bone structure. Jennifer's abuse was the most severe, Detective Cooper continued. Marcus had refined his techniques. The crawling punishments became more elaborate. He'd spread broken objects across the floor, make her crawl naked while he recorded her humiliation. "Where is Jennifer now?" "Dead," Detective Park said quietly. "Car accident 6 months after the divorce. Single vehicle crash on a clear day. No mechanical problems with the car. The investigating officers ruled it suicide." Rebecca's vision blurred. "He killed her." "We can't prove that, but the timing is suspicious." Jennifer had started talking to a therapist about writing a book exposing Marcus's abuse patterns. 3 days later, she drove her car into a concrete barrier at 80 miles per hour. The pieces clicked into place in Rebecca's mind. That's why Tiffany is with him. She's not his mistress. She's his revenge. Detective Cooper leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Jennifer exposed Marcus's methods to her family before she died. Tiffany knows exactly what kind of man he is. She's not falling for his charm. She's playing a long game." Rebecca's mind raced through the connections. "The night Marcus made me crawl across the broken glass, Tiffany wasn't enjoying my humiliation. She was documenting it, making sure Marcus felt confident enough to reveal his true nature on camera." "You think Tiffany was working with someone to expose Marcus?" Detective Park asked. "I think Tiffany was working to avenge her sister, and I think I was the bait. The pregnancy, the escalating abuse, the involvement of Tiffany in their home life. It all made sense now." "Check the timeline," Rebecca said urgently. "When did Tiffany start working at Harrison Industries?" Detective Cooper flipped through his notes. 8 months ago, right when Jennifer died, right when I got pregnant." Rebecca's voice grew stronger. "This whole thing was orchestrated. Tiffany got herself hired at Marcus's company, seduced him into an affair, then started pushing him to escalate his abuse of me." "Why would she put you at risk?" Detective Park asked. "Because she needed documentation. Jennifer died before she could prove Marcus's pattern of abuse. Tiffany needed current, Undeniable evidence. She needed him to incriminate himself on camera. Rebecca thought about the anniversary dinner, how Tiffany had deliberately provoked her, pushed Marcus to demonstrate his control methods. She knew he'd make me crawl. She knew he couldn't resist showing off his power to her, and she knew Eugene would be cleaning the building that night. Detective Cooper's eyes widened. The janitor was part of this. Eugene told me he'd been watching Marcus for 15 years. He'd seen 3 wives come and go. Maybe Tiffany approached him, asked him to help her document Marcus's abuse. The more Rebecca thought about it, the more certain she became. Eugene's convenient appearance at her door, the perfectly timed video footage, his immediate suggestion that she go to the police. I think Eugene has been collecting evidence for months. Not just video footage, but financial records, medical reports, witness statements. Everything needed to build an airtight case against Marcus. But why involve you? Detective Park asked. Why put a pregnant woman at risk? Rebecca's hand moved to her belly. Because I'm the perfect victim. Pregnant, isolated, financially dependent. If Marcus could be caught abusing someone this vulnerable, no jury would let him walk free. The realization was both horrifying and liberating. She'd been a pawn in Tiffany's revenge scheme, but that scheme might be her salvation. There's something else, Rebecca said suddenly. The night Marcus made me crawl, he said something strange. He told Tiffany that I was practice for what he'd do to her after we were married. Detective Cooper frowned. Practice. Marcus doesn't just abuse his wives. He breaks them systematically, then moves on to fresh victims. Tiffany isn't going to be his wife. She's going to be his next project. Rebecca pulled out her phone, scrolling through her recent calls. I need to call Tiffany. If I'm right about her motivations, she's in serious danger. Mrs. Harrison, Detective Park said carefully. If Tiffany is working to expose Marcus, contacting her now could compromise her safety. And if she's not working with anyone, she could be Marcus's next victim. Rebecca replied. Either way, I can't sit here and do nothing. She dialed Tiffany's number. It went straight to voicemail. Tiffany, this is Rebecca Harrison. I'm at the police station right now, and I think you and I need to talk. I know about Jennifer. I know why you're really with Marcus, and I think you might be in more danger than you realize. Rebecca hung up and looked at the detectives. What happens now? Now we verify your theory, Detective Cooper said, and we pray you're wrong about Tiffany being in immediate danger. But even as he spoke, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. He knows. Get out. Now. T. The baby kicked violently as Rebecca's blood pressure spiked. He know, she whispered. Marcus knows I'm here. Rebecca's Honda Civic pulled into the driveway of her Winnetka home at 4:37 in the afternoon. The house looked exactly as she'd left it 6 hours earlier. But everything felt different now. The manicured lawn, the perfect flower beds, the expensive cars in the driveway. It all felt like a stage set designed to hide the horror within. Detective Cooper's unmarked car parked across the street, close enough to respond but far enough away to remain unnoticed. Rebecca wore a wire, the tiny microphone taped between her breasts, hidden beneath her maternity blouse. Her hands shook as she turned off the engine. The baby was active today, rolling and kicking as if sensing her mother's distress. 8 months and 2 weeks pregnant, and Rebecca felt like she was carrying the weight of the world. She walked to the front door, fishing her keys from her purse. Before she could insert the key, the door swung open. Marcus stood in the doorway, wearing his charcoal gray suit, the one that made him look like a Fortune 500 executive. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile cold and calculating. He looked exactly like the man she'd fallen in love with 6 years ago. Hello, darling, he said. We need to talk. Rebecca stepped inside, noting how Marcus positioned himself between her and the front door. The house smelled like her lavender candles, but underneath was something else. Fear, rage, the metallic scent of violence waiting to happen. How was your afternoon? Marcus asked, his voice deceptively casual. Fine, Rebecca replied. I had a doctor's appointment. Dr. Mitchell's office called. You missed your 3 o'clock appointment? Rebecca's blood went cold. She'd forgotten about the prenatal appointment in her rush to get to the police station. I felt sick this morning, she lied. I called and rescheduled for next week. Marcus smiled, but his eyes remained dead. That's interesting, because Dr. Mitchell's receptionist said no one called to cancel. The living room felt smaller than usual, the expensive furniture closing in around her. Marcus had always been proud of this room. Leather furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Artwork chosen by an interior designer. A fireplace that had never been used. "Sit down, Rebecca," Marcus said, gesturing to the white sofa. Rebecca remained standing. For the first time in years, she didn't automatically obey his commands. "I said sit down," Marcus repeated, his voice harder. "I heard you," Rebecca replied. "I don't want to sit." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Surprise. Maybe even respect. He wasn't used to defiance from his wives. "You went to see the police today," he said. It wasn't a question. Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The wire felt hot against her skin. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Detective Ryan Cooper, Chicago PD. You sat in interview room 3 for 2 hours and 13 minutes. You showed them a video that I'm told is quite entertaining. How do you—" "I have friends everywhere. Darling, the police department, the district attorney's office, even the FBI. Did you really think you could move against me without me finding out?" Marcus began pacing around her in a slow circle, like a predator sizing up prey. "The question is, who gave you that video, because I'm very interested in having a conversation with them." Rebecca thought of Eugene, hoped he was somewhere safe. "I don't know what video you're referring to. The one showing you crawling across my office floor like the pathetic animal you are," Marcus said, his mask finally slipping. "The one that shows you apologizing to Tiffany for being such a disappointment as a wife." "You're sick," Rebecca whispered. "I'm practical," Marcus corrected. "Marriage is a business transaction. I provide financial security, social status, and protection. In exchange, you provide obedience, gratitude, and entertainment when I require it." He stopped circling and stood directly in front of her. "You violated the terms of our contract, Rebecca. That requires punishment." For the first time in years, Rebecca felt something other than fear when Marcus threatened her. She felt rage. "The only contract I signed was a marriage license," she said. "Not a slavery agreement." Marcus's hand moved faster than she could react, striking her across the face with enough force to make her stagger. The baby kicked violently in response to the sudden violence. "Don't you dare speak to me that way in my house," Marcus snarled. Rebecca touched her cheek, feeling the sting of his handprint. But instead of cowering, she straightened her shoulders. "This is my house too," she said. "My name is on the deed. Your name is on a piece of paper I can change with one phone call to my lawyer," Marcus replied. "Just like I did with Sarah, Amanda, and Jennifer." The mention of Jennifer's name made Rebecca's blood boil. "Is that what you did? You killed Jennifer when she tried to expose you." Marcus's smile was genuinely amused now. "Jennifer killed herself, darling. Couldn't live with the shame of what she'd become. Drove her car into a wall at 80 miles per hour rather than face the world knowing she'd been broken by a man." "You destroyed her," Rebecca said. "I trained her," Marcus corrected. "Just like I trained you. The crawling, the public humiliation, the systematic destruction of self-worth. It's all very scientific. I've perfected the process over 4 marriages." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital camera. "I document everything. Of course, every punishment, every moment of submission, every pathetic apology. I have hours of footage of you debasing yourself for my amusement." Rebecca realized this was Marcus's true sickness. Not just the abuse, but the documentation of it, the systematic collection of human suffering. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you need to destroy people who love you?" Marcus looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Because I can. Because power means nothing unless you use it. Because watching someone break piece by piece is the most intimate experience 2 people can share." The front door opened, and Tiffany Walsh walked in. She was visibly pregnant now, about 5 months along, wearing a designer maternity dress that probably cost more than Rebecca's car. "Is she cooperating?" Tiffany asked, her voice cold and professional. Rebecca stared at her in shock. "You're working with him," Tiffany smiled, but there was something wrong with her eyes. They looked dead, empty, exactly like Marcus's. I've been working with Marcus for 8 months, Tiffany said. Ever since we realized Jennifer had been talking to people about writing that book, the betrayal hit Rebecca like a physical blow. But Jennifer was your sister. Jennifer was weak, Tiffany replied. She let Marcus break her instead of learning to enjoy the power dynamic. I'm much stronger than she was. Rebecca's mind reeled. Everything she'd thought she understood was wrong. Tiffany wasn't seeking revenge for her sister. She was Marcus's willing partner in psychological torture. The video of you crawling was just the beginning, Marcus said. Tiffany suggested we escalate the documentation process. Show the world what happens to wives who don't appreciate their husbands. We're going to make you famous. Rebecca, Tiffany added, the pregnant wife who crawled across broken glass because she couldn't satisfy her husband's basic needs. Rebecca backed toward the fireplace, her mind racing. The wire was still recording everything, but Marcus and Tiffany were too smart to make explicit confessions of illegal activity. The police have the video, Rebecca said desperately. They know what you did to me. The police have a recording that shows a wife voluntarily debasing herself to apologize for poor hospitality, Marcus replied. No crime was committed. You chose to crawl. No one forced you. I have witnesses, Rebecca said. You have a night janitor with a history of alcoholism and mental illness, Tiffany replied. His testimony won't hold up in court, especially after we present evidence of his inappropriate fixation on you. Rebecca's back hit the mantelpiece. She was trapped, pregnant, and completely at Marcus's mercy. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his voice taking on the tone he used for business negotiations. You're going to call Detective Cooper and tell him you made a mistake. The video was taken out of context, and you're not pressing charges? No, Rebecca said. Marcus's expression darkened. Excuse me. I said no. Rebecca's voice grew stronger. I won't do it. For the first time since she'd known him, Marcus looked genuinely angry. Not the cold, calculated anger he used to control her, but raw, primal fury at being defied. Then we moved to the alternative plan, he said. Tiffany opened her purse and pulled out a small bottle of pills. These are industrial-strength sleeping pills. You're going to take them. Drive to the lake and follow Jennifer's example. Hunam, Rebecca's hand moved to her belly. You want me to kill myself and my baby. We want you to take responsibility for your failures as a wife and mother, Marcus corrected. The suicide note is already written. Very touching. You couldn't live with the shame of your behavior. Couldn't bear to bring a child into a world where you'd failed so completely. People will know it's fake, Rebecca said. People will know you were a mentally unstable woman who made false accusations against your husband before taking your own life, Tiffany replied. It's actually perfect. Discredits your police testimony while generating sympathy for Marcus as the grieving widower. The baby kicked again, harder this time. Rebecca closed her eyes and made a decision that would change everything. No, she said one more time. Then she picked up the heavy crystal vase from the mantelpiece and swung it at Marcus's head with every ounce of strength in her pregnant body. The crystal vase shattered against Marcus's temple with a sound like thunder. He staggered backward, blood streaming from a gash above his left eye. His perfect composure finally cracked. You bitch, he roared, lunging toward Rebecca. But pregnancy had made Rebecca slower, and Marcus's reflexes were faster than she'd anticipated. His hands closed around her throat, squeezing with methodical pressure as Tiffany screamed behind him. Marcus, stop! We need her alive until she takes the pills. Rebecca clawed at his hands, her vision darkening around the edges. The baby was kicking frantically now, responding to her mother's distress and lack of oxygen. 8 months of pregnancy, and her daughter was fighting for both their lives. Marcus's grip loosened slightly. You think you can defy me in my own house? He hissed. You think the police are going to save you from what you've earned? Rebecca used the momentary reprieve to drive her knee upward, catching Marcus in the groin. He doubled over, releasing her throat completely. She ran toward the kitchen, her pregnant body awkward and unbalanced. Behind her, Marcus was already recovering, his rage transforming into something cold and calculating. Rebecca, stop running, he called after her. You're only making this harder on yourself. The kitchen knives were in the block on the counter. Rebecca grabbed the largest one, a 10-inch chef's knife that Marcus had insisted they register for their wedding. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the handle. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, Tiffany close behind him. The gash on his head had stopped bleeding, but his white shirt was stained crimson. "Put the knife down, Rebecca," he said in the same tone he used to discipline employees. "You don't want to hurt anyone." "Stay away from me," Rebecca said, brandishing the knife. "I've already called the police. They're on their way." "No, you haven't," Tiffany said. "Your phone is in your purse in the living room." Rebecca's heart sank. She'd forgotten about the phone in her panic to escape Marcus's hands. "Even if you had called them, what would you tell them?" Marcus asked, taking a step closer. "That your husband defended himself when you attacked him with a vase, that you threatened him with a knife in his own kitchen." He was right, and they all knew it. The physical evidence would support his version of events. Rebecca's fingerprints on the vase, Marcus's injury from her attack, her holding the knife when police arrived. "They have the video," Rebecca said desperately. "They have a recording that shows marital roleplay," Marcus corrected. "Plenty of couples engage in consensual power dynamics. The fact that you're now making false accusations and threatening violence suggests mental instability, not abuse." Tiffany nodded in agreement. "When they find your suicide note confessing to making false allegations, it'll all make perfect sense." Rebecca backed against the kitchen counter, the knife still raised between her and her attackers. The baby was moving constantly now, as if trying to escape the womb that had become a prison. "Why are you doing this, Tiffany?" Rebecca asked. "Jennifer was your sister. How can you help him after what he did to her?" Tiffany's expression softened for just a moment, revealing something like genuine emotion beneath the cold facade. "Jennifer was always the perfect one," Tiffany said quietly. "Beautiful, smart, successful. Everyone loved Jennifer. When she started dating Marcus, I was jealous at first." She moved closer, her pregnant belly visible beneath the designer dress. "But then I watched what he did to her, how he systematically destroyed everything that made her special. And I realized that Marcus had given me a gift. He'd shown me how to break the person who'd made me feel inferior, my entire life." Rebecca stared at her in horror. "You helped him abuse your own sister." "I studied his methods," Tiffany replied. "Learned his techniques. When Jennifer started talking about writing that book, I knew she had to be stopped before she could expose Marcus's system. So you killed her." "I convinced her that suicide was the only way to escape the shame of what she'd become," Tiffany corrected. "Jennifer drove that car into the wall herself. I just helped her see it as the logical solution." Marcus smiled proudly at his protege. "Tiffany has real talent for psychological manipulation. Much more natural ability than my previous wives." Rebecca's grip on the knife tightened. "You're both insane." "We're both survivors," Marcus said. "The world is divided into predators and prey. Rebecca, you were born to be prey. We were born to hunt." He took another step closer, close enough now that Rebecca could smell his expensive cologne mixed with blood and sweat. "The question is whether you want to die fighting or die peacefully. Either way, you're going to die today." Rebecca's vision blurred as tears streamed down her face. 8 months of pregnancy, 8 months of planning for her daughter's future, and it was all going to end in this kitchen, with a knife in her hand and terror in her heart. But then she heard something that changed everything. The distant sound of sirens approaching fast. Marcus heard it too. His confident expression faltered for the first time. "That's impossible," Tiffany said. "She didn't call anyone." Rebecca smiled through her tears. "I didn't need to call anyone. I've been wearing a wire since I left the police station. Detective Cooper has been listening to everything." Marcus's face went pale. "That's impossible. We checked for recording devices." "You checked my purse and my jacket," Rebecca said. "You didn't think to check inside my bra." The sirens were getting closer, and Rebecca could see police cars through the kitchen window. Marcus grabbed Tiffany's hand. "We need to leave. Now." But Tiffany was staring at Rebecca with something like admiration. "You played us," she said. "The whole helpless victim act was just performance." "I learned from the best," Rebecca replied. "You taught me that survival sometimes requires playing a role." The front door exploded inward as police officers flooded into the house, shouting commands and drawing weapons. Detective Cooper's voice rose above the chaos. "Rebecca Harrison, are you all right?" In the kitchen, Rebecca called back, never taking her eyes off Marcus and Tiffany. Within seconds, the kitchen was full of police officers. Marcus and Tiffany were forced to the ground, hands cuffed behind their backs. The knife fell from Rebecca's shaking fingers as Detective Cooper helped her to a chair. "We got it all on the wire," he said quietly. "The confessions, the threats, the planned murder disguised as suicide. They're going away for a very long time." Rebecca's hand moved to her belly as the baby's kicking finally began to calm. "What happens now?" "Now we make sure they never hurt anyone again," Detective Cooper replied. As Marcus and Tiffany were led away in handcuffs, Marcus turned back to look at Rebecca one last time. His expression was no longer cold or calculating. It was pure, impotent rage. "This isn't over," he said. Rebecca met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, it is." For the first time in 4 years, she truly believed her own words. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Rebecca sat on the edge of a hospital bed, her legs dangling like a child's, while Dr. Sarah Mitchell examined the bruises on her throat. "The swelling should go down in a few days," Dr. Mitchell said, her voice gentle but clinical. "But we need to monitor you and the baby overnight. Strangulation during pregnancy can cause complications even if there's no immediate distress." Rebecca nodded, too exhausted to speak. The wire had been removed, leaving a red mark between her breasts. Detective Cooper sat in a chair by the window, filling out paperwork and occasionally glancing up to check on her. "Mrs. Harrison," Dr. Mitchell continued, "I need to ask you some difficult questions about your pregnancy. Have you experienced any bleeding or cramping since the incident?" Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The baby had been quiet since they'd arrived at the hospital, no longer kicking and rolling like she had during the confrontation. "She's been very still," Rebecca whispered. "Usually she's active around this time of day." Dr. Mitchell's expression grew concerned. "We're going to do an ultrasound to check on the baby. Try to stay calm. Stress can affect fetal movement patterns." But Rebecca was already spiraling into panic. What if Marcus's attack had hurt her daughter? What if the stress of the confrontation had caused complications? What if her decision to fight back had cost her baby her life? A technician wheeled in the ultrasound machine, and Rebecca lay back on the bed, exposing her swollen belly. The gel was cold against her skin, and the technician's expression was professionally neutral as she moved the wand across Rebecca's abdomen. For 30 seconds, that felt like 30 years. There was only silence and the sound of Rebecca's heart pounding in her ears. Then the strong, steady rhythm of a fetal heartbeat filled the room. "There she is," the technician said with a smile. "Heart rate is 142 beats per minute, which is perfect for 36 weeks. She looks like she's just sleeping." Rebecca burst into tears, months of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. Dr. Mitchell squeezed her hand while Detective Cooper looked away to give her privacy. "She's okay," Rebecca sobbed. "My baby is okay." "She's more than okay," Dr. Mitchell said. "She's thriving, despite everything you've both been through. You did a good job protecting her, Rebecca." But Rebecca didn't feel like she'd done a good job of anything. She felt like she'd failed in every possible way. As a wife, as a woman, as a mother-to-be. "I should have left him years ago," she said through her tears. "I should have protected her from all of this." "Rebecca," Dr. Mitchell said firmly, "what happened to you wasn't your fault. Marcus Harrison is a predator who systematically destroyed your ability to see alternatives. The fact that you found the strength to fight back shows incredible courage." "I almost got us both killed," Rebecca replied. "If Detective Cooper hadn't been listening to the wire, Marcus would have forced me to take those pills." Detective Cooper looked up from his paperwork. "Mrs. Harrison, the wire was your idea. You insisted on going back to the house to get evidence. You put yourself at risk to make sure we could build a case that would stick." Rebecca knew he was right, but the guilt was crushing her anyway. 4 years of gaslighting had trained her to blame herself for everything that went wrong. A nurse brought her a cup of ice chips, and Rebecca crunched them slowly, trying to focus on the physical sensation instead of the emotional storm raging inside her. "What happens to Marcus and Tiffany now?" she asked. "They're being held without bail on charges of domestic violence, criminal confinement, conspiracy to commit murder, an accessory to suicide in Jennifer Walsh's death, Detective Cooper replied. Based on the evidence we've collected and their recorded confessions, they're looking at decades in prison. Rebecca felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that they couldn't hurt her anymore. Terror at the thought of testifying against them in court. Will I have to see them again? She asked. Eventually, yes. There will be preliminary hearings, plea negotiations, and possibly a trial, but we'll make sure you're protected every step of the way. Dr. Mitchell finished her examination and pulled up a chair next to Rebecca's bed. I want to talk to you about what happens next, not legally but personally. You've been through severe trauma, and you're going to need support as you heal. I don't have anyone, Rebecca said quietly. Marcus made sure of that. You have more support than you realize, Dr. Mitchell replied. Linda Carter has been calling the hospital every hour asking about you. Your mother is driving down from Seattle. And there's a whole network of domestic violence survivors who want to help. Rebecca had forgotten about Linda, her best friend from college who'd been pushed out of her life so gradually she'd barely noticed it happening. Linda probably hates me, Rebecca said. I haven't talked to her in 3 years. Linda is angry, but not at you. She's angry at Marcus for isolating you and angry at herself for not fighting harder to maintain contact. She wants to be here for you now. The thought of seeing Linda again filled Rebecca with equal parts joy and shame. How could she explain 4 years of submission to someone who'd known her as strong and independent? I don't know how to be myself anymore, Rebecca admitted. Marcus controlled everything. What I ate, what I wore, how I spent my time, who I talked to. I don't even know what I like anymore. Dr. Mitchell nodded understanding. That's normal for long-term abuse survivors. Your identity was systematically erased and replaced with Marcus's version of who you should be. Recovering your sense of self is going to take time. What if I can't do it? Rebecca asked. What if he broke something in me that can't be fixed? Then you'll build something new. Dr. Mitchell replied simply. You don't have to go back to being who you were before Marcus. You can become someone entirely different, someone stronger. Rebecca's hand moved to her belly again. The baby was awake now, moving gently as if responding to her mother's voice. I keep thinking about what kind of mother I'm going to be, Rebecca said. I spent 4 years letting a man control every aspect of my life. How can I teach my daughter to be strong when I was so weak? You weren't weak, Detective Cooper interjected. Survival isn't weakness. Adapting to dangerous circumstances isn't weakness. The fact that you're still here, still fighting for your daughter, proves your strength. Marcus used to say I was pathetic, Rebecca whispered, that no one would ever love someone as broken as me. Dr. Mitchell's expression hardened. Marcus said that because he needed you to believe it, abusers destroy their victims' self-worth to maintain control. The fact that you can question those messages now shows they didn't work completely. A gentle knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Linda Carter stood in the doorway, her dark hair longer than Rebecca remembered, her expression a mixture of joy and concern. Becca, she said quietly, can I come in? Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. Linda crossed the room and wrapped her arms around her former best friend, careful not to press against her injured throat or pregnant belly. I'm so sorry, Linda whispered. I should have tried harder to stay in touch. I should have known something was wrong. I pushed you away, Rebecca replied, her voice muffled against Linda's shoulder. Marcus made it so hard to maintain friendships that I gave up trying. Well, I'm not going anywhere now, Linda said firmly. You're stuck with me whether you like it or not. For the first time in years, Rebecca laughed. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but it was genuine. I don't even know where to start, Rebecca said. I don't have a job, or friends, or any idea how to take care of a baby on my own. You start by taking it one day at a time, Linda replied, and you let the people who love you help you figure it out. Rebecca looked around the hospital room at the people who had gathered to support her. Dr. Mitchell, Detective Cooper, Linda, and soon her mother. For 4 years, Marcus had convinced her she was alone in the world. But maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong about that too. The baby kicked again, a strong, definitive movement that made Rebecca smile through her tears. She's going to be okay, she said, not sure if she was talking about her daughter or herself. You both are, Linda assured her. It's going to take time, and it's going to be hard, but you're both going to be more than okay. Rebecca closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future where that was true. For the first time in years, she could actually see it. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation. Rebecca sat in the sunroom of Linda's North Shore townhouse, folding baby clothes with methodical precision. The November sunlight streamed through the windows, warming her face as her daughter kicked gently against her ribs. The past 21 days had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, medical appointments, and emotional unpacking. Marcus and Tiffany remained in custody, denied bail after prosecutors argued they posed a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. Rebecca had testified before a grand jury, her voice steady as she recounted years of systematic abuse. "The purple onesie or the yellow one?" Linda asked, holding up two tiny outfits. Rebecca smiled. "Both. She's going to need a lot of clothes." Linda had insisted Rebecca move in during the final weeks of her pregnancy. The townhouse was nothing like the sterile perfection of the Winnetka mansion. It was warm, lived in, filled with mismatched furniture and photographs of friends and family. Rebecca had forgotten what it felt like to live in a space that reflected personality instead of status. Dr. Mitchell knocked on the doorframe before entering the sunroom. "How are we feeling today?" "Like a beached whale," Rebecca replied, then caught herself. "Sorry, I'm trying not to make self-deprecating comments. Linda's been calling me out on it." "Good," Dr. Mitchell said, settling into an armchair. "Self-compassion is a crucial part of healing from abuse. How are you sleeping?" Rebecca considered the question honestly. "Better than I have in years. I don't wake up every hour checking to make sure I haven't done something to anger Marcus in my sleep." It was true. For the first time in her marriage, Rebecca was sleeping through the night, no longer hypervigilant, no longer walking on eggshells. Her body was finally allowing itself to rest. "Any nightmares, Dr. Mitchell asked. "Sometimes, but they're different now. Instead of dreams where I'm trapped or helpless, I dream about fighting back. Sometimes I dream about the day I hit Marcus with that vase." Rebecca had been surprised to discover that she wasn't ashamed of the violence. If anything, she felt proud of herself for finally defending her life and her daughter's life. "That suggests your psyche is processing the trauma in a healthy way," Dr. Mitchell observed. "You're reclaiming your agency, even in your dreams." Linda set down the baby clothes and joined their conversation. "She's been amazing. Sarah, you should see her handling the legal stuff. She's like a completely different person than the woman who walked into the police station a month ago." Rebecca flushed at the praise. Compliments still felt foreign after years of constant criticism from Marcus. "What's different?" Dr. Mitchell asked. Rebecca thought about it. "I'm making decisions for myself, small ones, like what to eat for breakfast or what to watch on television, but also bigger ones, like whether to pursue criminal charges or accept a plea bargain." The district attorney had approached Rebecca's lawyer about the possibility of Marcus pleading guilty to reduce charges in exchange for a shorter sentence. Rebecca had rejected the offer immediately. "I want him to face the full consequences of what he did," she'd told the prosecutor. "Not just to me, but to Sarah, Amanda, and Jennifer, and to all the women he might hurt in the future if he gets out too soon." Detective Cooper had called yesterday with an update. 3 more women had come forward after news of Marcus's arrest became public. Former employees, business associates, even a neighbor who'd witnessed suspicious incidents but hadn't known how to intervene. "The case is rock solid," Detective Cooper had assured her. "Marcus's own recorded confessions are going to make this trial very short." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. Her mother, still driving down from Seattle, was 5 hours away and excited to meet her granddaughter. "I'm nervous about Mom visiting," Rebecca admitted to Linda and Dr. Mitchell. "She loved Marcus. She's going to have a hard time believing what he really was." Linda frowned. "What makes you think that?" "She used to tell me how lucky I was to have such a devoted husband. When I tried to talk to her about small problems in the marriage, she'd say I was being ungrateful." Rebecca's relationship with her mother had been another casualty of Marcus's control. He'd systematically positioned himself as the perfect son-in-law while subtly undermining Rebecca's credibility with her family. "People respond to abuse disclosures in different ways," Dr. Mitchell said gently. Some are immediately supportive. Others need time to process the information. Your mother's initial reaction doesn't necessarily reflect her long-term support. Rebecca hoped that was true. She was going to need her mother's help in the coming months, especially after the baby was born. A sharp pain in her lower back made Rebecca wince. She'd been having irregular contractions for 2 days, but Dr. Mitchell had assured her they were normal for 37 weeks. How long between contractions? Linda asked, noticing Rebecca's discomfort. They're not regular, Rebecca replied. Sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes an hour. Dr. Mitchell says it could be weeks before real labor starts. But even as she spoke, another contraction gripped her belly, stronger than the previous ones. Rebecca breathed through it, using the techniques she'd learned in the prenatal classes Marcus had forbidden her to attend. That was only 10 minutes since the last one, Linda observed, checking her watch. Dr. Mitchell stood up. Rebecca, I think we should head to the hospital, just to be safe. But it's too early, Rebecca protested. She's not due for 3 more weeks. Babies don't always follow schedules, Dr. Mitchell replied with a smile. And given everything your body has been through lately, it makes sense that she might want to make her appearance early. Rebecca felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She'd been preparing for this moment for months, but suddenly it felt too soon, too real, too overwhelming. What if I'm not ready? She asked. What if I don't know how to be a good mother? Linda took her hand. Becca, you've already been protecting this baby for 9 months under impossible circumstances. You've already proven you're going to be a wonderful mother. Another contraction hit, stronger and more regular than before. Rebecca gripped Linda's hand as she breathed through the pain. Okay, she said when it passed. Let's go have a baby. But first, she did something she'd never been allowed to do during her marriage. She called her mother. Mom, I'm going into labor. Can you meet us at Northwestern Memorial? Her mother's voice was filled with joy and concern. Of course, sweetheart. I'll be there as soon as I can. Mom, Rebecca added before hanging up, there's a lot we need to talk about when you get here. About Marcus. About what really happened in my marriage. A pause and then, I know, honey. Linda filled me in on the drive down. We'll talk about everything later. Right now, just focus on bringing my granddaughter into the world safely. Rebecca ended the call and looked around the sunroom one more time. When she returned to this house, she'd be a mother. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and empowering. Ready? Linda asked, grabbing the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago. Rebecca stood up, her hand on her belly as the baby shifted and settled. I'm ready. For the first time in years, she truly was. The Cook County Courthouse loomed like a fortress against the gray February sky. Rebecca Harrison walked up the limestone steps, her 3-month-old daughter sleeping peacefully in a carrier against her chest. The baby had arrived healthy and strong on November 20th, 2 weeks after Marcus's arrest, as if she'd been waiting for the world to be safe before making her entrance. Rebecca had named her daughter Grace, for the grace she'd found in survival, for the grace shown by friends who'd helped her rebuild her life, for the grace she hoped to show others walking similar paths. Linda walked beside her, carrying a diaper bag and legal files. Detective Cooper met them at the courthouse entrance, his expression grim but determined. How are you feeling? He asked. Ready. Rebecca replied, and meant it. The past 4 months had transformed her in ways she was still discovering. Her hair was shorter now, cut in a style she'd chosen herself. Her clothes were her own purchases, made with money from a part-time marketing consulting job Linda had helped her find. Small changes, but they represented something profound. The rebuilding of Rebecca Matthews Harrison into someone entirely new. Marcus's trial had been delayed twice while prosecutors built their case. In addition to Rebecca's charges, they'd added counts related to Jennifer Walsh's death, financial fraud, and conspiracy charges involving Tiffany. The evidence was overwhelming, but Marcus's defense team was expensive and creative. Is he going to try to claim it was consensual? Linda asked as they passed through security. Detective Cooper nodded grimly. His lawyers are arguing that the crawling incidents were part of a consensual adult relationship, that Rebecca was a willing participant in what they're calling domestic discipline. Rebecca's jaw tightened. Even facing decades in prison, Marcus was trying to rewrite history, to make her complicit in her own abuse. The recordings will prove otherwise, and she said, no one consents to being threatened with murder. They took the elevator to the 5th floor, where the courtroom was already crowded with reporters, legal observers, and domestic violence advocates. Rebecca's story had garnered significant media attention, particularly after 3 other women had come forward with similar experiences. Sarah Connor sat in the gallery, having flown in from Portland to testify about her marriage to Marcus. Amanda Patterson had provided a video deposition from her home in California, too traumatized to appear in person. Jennifer Walsh's parents sat in the front row, their faces etched with grief and determination. Rebecca took her place at the prosecutor's table next to Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos, a fierce woman in her 40s who specialized in domestic violence cases. Remember, Ada Santos said quietly, tell the truth clearly and simply. Don't let his lawyer rattle you. The jury needs to see you as you are now, strong, credible, and unashamed. The bailiff called for order as Judge Patricia Williams entered the courtroom. Rebecca had met Judge Williams during pretrial conferences and found her to be fair, but no nonsense, with little patience for legal games. Marcus was led to the defense table in handcuffs, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller than Rebecca remembered. He'd lost weight during his months in custody, his face gaunt and his eyes hollow. When he looked at Rebecca, she met his gaze steadily, without fear. Tiffany sat at a separate defense table, having chosen to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her pregnancy was now obvious, her due date approaching rapidly. The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca, both women pregnant with Marcus's children, but only one of them free to raise her baby. Your Honor, Ada Santos began, the people call Rebecca Harrison to the stand. Rebecca handed Grace to Linda and walked to the witness stand. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, her voice clear and steady. Mrs. Harrison, Ada Santos began, please tell the jury about your marriage to the defendant. Rebecca had practiced this testimony dozens of times, but speaking the words in front of Marcus felt surreal. She described the courtship, the gradual isolation, the escalating abuse, the systematic destruction of her identity and independence. Can you describe the incident that occurred on October 15th of last year? Ada Santos asked. Rebecca's voice never wavered as she recounted the anniversary dinner, the broken glass, the forced crawling, the humiliation and pain. Did you consent to crawling across broken glass? Ada Santos asked. No, Rebecca replied firmly. I crawled because I was terrified of what Marcus would do to me and my unborn child if I refused. How do you know he would have escalated the violence? Because he'd done it before? Every time I showed defiance, the punishment became more severe. I crawled across that glass to survive. Marcus's defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Robert Blackwood, rose for cross-examination. Mrs. Harrison, he began, his tone condescending. Isn't it true that you enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle as Marcus Harrison's wife? I enjoyed the illusion of security, Rebecca replied, but luxury means nothing when you're living in constant fear. You had access to significant financial resources. Did you not? I had access to whatever Marcus chose to give me. I had no independent access to bank accounts, credit cards, or even my own identification documents. Blackwood frowned, clearly hoping to paint Rebecca as a gold digger. But you chose to stay in the marriage for 4 years. Rebecca had expected this question. Mr. Blackwood, when someone systematically destroys your ability to see alternatives, when they isolate you from support systems and convince you that you're worthless without them, leaving becomes nearly impossible. I stayed because Marcus made sure I couldn't see any other option. But you eventually did leave, Blackwood pressed. I didn't leave, Rebecca corrected. I was forced to choose between fighting back or watching my daughter grow up believing that abuse is love. I chose to fight. Blackwood tried several more angles, attempting to portray Rebecca as vindictive, mentally unstable, or financially motivated. But Rebecca had spent months preparing for this moment, working with therapists and prosecutors to understand her own story. Mr. Blackwood, she said during one particularly aggressive line of questioning, you're asking me to justify surviving? I won't do that. I survived because my daughter deserved better than growing up in a house where women crawl on broken glass to apologize for existing. The courtroom was silent when Rebecca finished her testimony. She walked back to the gallery with her head high, reclaiming grace from Linda's arms. Her daughter stirred briefly, opening dark eyes that looked remarkably like Rebecca's own. Sarah Connor's testimony was devastating in its similarity to Rebecca's experience. The same isolation tactics, the same financial control, the same escalating physical abuse. The jury listened with growing horror as the pattern became clear. "He made me crawl across the kitchen floor covered in broken dishes," Sarah testified. "When I cut my knees, he said it was my fault for being clumsy." Amanda Patterson's video deposition was equally powerful. Even through the screen, her trauma was evident as she described years of systematic abuse that had left her unable to leave her home without panic attacks. "I thought I was going crazy," Amanda said on the recording. "Marcus would do things, move my belongings, cancel my appointments, tell people I'd said things I never said, and then convince me I was forgetting or imagining things. It took me 3 years of therapy to understand that it wasn't my failing memory. It was his deliberate psychological manipulation." The most damaging testimony came from Eugene Martinez, the night janitor whose video recording had started the legal process. "I watched 3 wives come and go," Eugene said quietly. "Each one arrived happy and confident. Each one left broken and afraid. I knew if I didn't act when I saw that video, Mrs. Harrison and her baby would end up like Mrs. Jennifer Walsh." Eugene had been collecting evidence for months. Not just the video footage, but also audio recordings of Marcus's phone calls, copies of financial documents, and witness statements from other employees who'd observed suspicious behavior. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Ada Santos asked. Eugene's weathered face was filled with regret. "I was scared. Mr. Harrison is a powerful man with powerful friends. I thought no one would believe a night janitor over a CEO. What changed your mind?" "The baby," Eugene said simply. "I couldn't let another child grow up thinking that was normal." The prosecution's final witness was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who testified about the medical evidence of long-term abuse and the psychological impact on Rebecca's pregnancy. "The stress of chronic abuse can cause severe complications during pregnancy," Dr. Mitchell explained. "Mrs. Harrison showed signs of hypervigilance, depression, and trauma-induced anxiety that put both her and her baby at risk." The defense case was brief and ineffective. Marcus's character witnesses, mostly business associates, could only testify to his professional success in charitable contributions. When pressed about his personal relationships, they admitted they'd never spent time with Marcus and his wives socially. Tiffany Walsh took the stand as part of her cooperation agreement. Her testimony was clinical and devastating. "Marcus viewed marriage as a business transaction," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "The wife provided services, domestic, social, and sexual, in exchange for financial support. If the wife failed to meet expectations, punishment was required to maintain the contract." "Did Marcus explain this philosophy to you?" Ada Santos asked. "He called it wife training. He said it took approximately 2 years to break a strong woman's independence completely. After that, she would do anything to avoid punishment, including crawling across broken glass. That was an advanced technique. Marcus used it when he wanted to demonstrate complete dominance, usually in front of witnesses to maximize humiliation." Tiffany's testimony revealed the calculated nature of Marcus's abuse. It wasn't crimes of passion or momentary anger. It was systematic, methodical psychological torture designed to create complete submission. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. "On the charge of aggravated domestic battery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of criminal confinement, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of accessory to suicide, we find the defendant guilty." Marcus's face remained impassive as the guilty verdicts were read on all 23 counts. Rebecca felt no satisfaction, only a deep sense of closure. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for the following month, but the prosecutors had already outlined their recommendation: 40 years in prison without possibility of parole for 30 years. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca gave a brief statement to the media. "This verdict isn't just about me," she said, Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms. "It's about every woman who's been told she's crazy for recognizing abuse. It's about every woman who's been convinced she deserves punishment for imaginary failures. And it's about making sure that men like Marcus Harrison face real consequences for the lives they destroy, a reporter called out. What's next for you and Grace? Rebecca smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd worn in the courthouse. We're going home, she said, and we're going to build a life where crawling is something babies do when they're learning to walk, not something women do when they're begging to survive. 2 years later, Rebecca Harrison stood at the podium of the Hilton Chicago, looking out at an audience of 300 domestic violence survivors, advocates, and legal professionals. Grace, now a toddler with her mother's determined expression, played quietly in the front row under Linda's watchful eye. The annual conference of the National Domestic Violence Network had invited Rebecca to give the keynote address. The theme was From Victim to Victory, but Rebecca had chosen a different title for her speech, The Power of Truth. 2 years ago, Rebecca began, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. I crawled across broken glass while 8 months pregnant because I'd forgotten how to stand up for myself. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Today, my daughter is learning to walk, and I'm learning to walk alongside her, not on my knees, not in fear, but with dignity and purpose. The transformation hadn't been easy. The first months after Grace's birth had been a blur of legal proceedings, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. Rebecca had struggled with postpartum depression, compounded by trauma recovery. There had been days when getting out of bed felt impossible, but slowly, with the support of Linda, her mother, and an expanding circle of friends and advocates, Rebecca had begun to rebuild not just her life, but her sense of self. The Harrison Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors had been established with funds from Marcus's frozen assets, which had been forfeited to the state as proceeds of criminal activity. Rebecca served as executive director, overseeing programs that provided legal aid, counseling, and emergency housing for abuse survivors. We help women reclaim their power, Rebecca continued, not by telling them they're strong, they already know that, or they wouldn't have survived, but by providing practical resources that make independence possible. The foundation had helped 47 women leave abusive relationships in its first year of operation. They'd provided security deposits for apartments, job training programs, childcare during court proceedings, and trauma-informed therapy. Eugene Martinez had become the foundation's head of security, using his skills and network of contacts to help women safely escape dangerous situations. His basement office was filled with security monitors, legal documents, and photos of the women he'd helped save. People ask me about forgiveness, Rebecca said, moving away from the podium to walk closer to the audience. They want to know if I've forgiven Marcus for what he did to me. She paused, thinking about the question she'd been asked countless times by reporters, therapists, and well-meaning friends. I've forgiven the woman who stayed silent for 4 years while she was being destroyed. I've forgiven the woman who crawled across broken glass because she'd forgotten she had the right to refuse. I've forgiven myself for believing that love meant accepting punishment. The audience stirred, recognizing the radical nature of self-forgiveness in a culture that often blamed victims for their circumstances. But I will never forgive Marcus Harrison for the calculated cruelty he showed to me and to the women who came before me. Forgiveness is for mistakes and momentary lapses in judgment. What Marcus did was systematic torture. That doesn't deserve forgiveness. It deserves consequences. Marcus had been sentenced to 40 years in prison after a sentencing hearing where Rebecca, Sarah, Amanda, and the families of Jennifer Walsh had given victim impact statements. Tiffany had received 15 years for her role in the conspiracy, her cooperation agreement providing some leniency. The most common question I'm asked, Rebecca continued, is how I found the courage to fight back. The answer is simple. I didn't find courage. I found clarity. She gestured to Grace, who was now walking independently around the front row, her chubby legs carrying her in determined circles. I realized that everything I'd been taught about love was wrong. Love doesn't require submission. Love doesn't demand silence. Love doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. Rebecca's voice grew stronger as she approached the heart of her message. Real love, the love I have for my daughter, the love my friends have shown me, the love I'm learning to have for myself. Real love makes you bigger, braver, more yourself than you ever thought possible. The foundation had expanded beyond direct services to include legislative advocacy. Rebecca had testified before state lawmakers about the need for stronger, domestic violence laws, particularly regarding psychological abuse and reproductive coercion. We're working to change laws that treat domestic violence as a private family matter instead of the serious crime it is, Rebecca explained. We're training police officers, judges, and social workers to recognize the patterns of systematic abuse that don't leave obvious physical marks. The most personal project had been the creation of the Jennifer Walsh Memorial Scholarship, which provided financial support for domestic violence survivors pursuing higher education. Jennifer Walsh was brilliant, accomplished, and strong, Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. But Marcus Harrison convinced her that she was worthless, that suicide was her only escape from shame. We can't bring Jennifer back, but we can make sure her memory helps other women reclaim their worth. 3 women had graduated from college in the past year with support from the scholarship fund. One was now in law school, planning to specialize in family law. Another had started her own business. The third was working on a master's degree in social work. I want to talk about something that makes people uncomfortable, Rebecca said, returning to the podium. We need to stop treating survival as a character flaw. The audience leaned forward, sensing a shift in tone. Society loves stories of resilient survivors who bounce back quickly, who turn trauma into inspiration, who find silver linings in their suffering. But healing isn't linear, and strength isn't about pretending you weren't damaged. Rebecca had learned this lesson the hard way during her first year of recovery. Well-meaning people had praised her strength while subtly pressuring her to move on and focus on the positive. Some days I still wake up checking to make sure I haven't done something wrong. Some days I still apologize for taking up space. Some days I still feel like that woman crawling across broken glass. The honesty was radical in a culture that preferred tidy redemption narratives. But those feelings are getting smaller and farther apart. And in between them, I'm discovering something I thought Marcus had destroyed forever: joy. Grace had wandered over to the stage and was now pulling herself up the steps toward her mother. Rebecca bent down and lifted her daughter into her arms. This little girl will never crawl unless she chooses to, Rebecca said, kissing Grace's forehead. She'll never apologize for existing. She'll never believe that love requires suffering. The audience erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. That's the real victory, Rebecca continued when the applause died down. Not just surviving, not just escaping, but raising a generation of children who understand that they deserve love without conditions, respect without question, and lives without fear. Rebecca's mother had moved to Chicago after Grace was born, helping with childcare and providing the unconditional support Rebecca had needed during her darkest moments. Linda had become more than a friend. She was family, Grace's honorary aunt and Rebecca's co-parent in all but name. I started the Harrison Foundation not because I'm especially strong or brave, Rebecca said, but because I got lucky. I had friends who refused to abandon me, strangers who risked their safety to help me, and a legal system that finally worked the way it's supposed to. The Foundation's hotline received dozens of calls each week from women in situations similar to Rebecca's former circumstances. Not all of them were ready to leave, but knowing that help was available when they were ready sometimes made the difference between life and death. If you're listening to this speech and recognizing yourself in my story, I want you to know something, Rebecca said, looking directly into the camera that was recording her remarks. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. You are not too sensitive, too demanding, or too difficult to love. Her voice grew fierce with conviction. You deserve to wake up excited about the day ahead instead of terrified of making mistakes. You deserve to have opinions, preferences, and boundaries. You deserve to take up space in the world without apologizing for it. Chiriro. Rebecca had learned to recognize the signs of abuse in other women, the constant apologizing, the hypervigilance, the way they made themselves small in public spaces. The Foundation's training programs help teachers, healthcare workers, and community members identify and respond appropriately to domestic violence. Change happens one conversation at a time, one woman at a time, one family at a time, Rebecca said. Every time we refuse to accept abuse as normal, we make the world safer for girls like Grace. As she spoke, Grace babbled happily in her arms, completely at ease in front of the crowd. Rebecca's daughter had never known a world where women cowered, where love meant pain, where strength was measured by silence. I want to leave you with the words that changed my life, Rebecca said as her speech drew to a close. Detective Ryan Cooper said them to me in that police station interview room when I was convinced I was worthless and broken. She paused, remembering that moment of transformation. He said, survival isn't weakness. Adapting to dangerous circumstances isn't weakness. The fact that you're still here, still fighting for your daughter, proves your strength. Rebecca looked out at the audience. Survivors, advocates, family members, professionals, all united in the belief that domestic violence could be stopped. We are still here, she said simply. We are still fighting. And that proves our strength. The standing ovation lasted for 5 full minutes. As Rebecca walked off the stage with Grace in her arms, she felt something she'd never experienced during her marriage to Marcus. Complete peace with who she was and where she was going. Later that evening, Linda joined Rebecca in the hotel room where Grace was sleeping peacefully in a portable crib. How do you feel? Linda asked. Rebecca considered the question seriously. Grateful, she said finally. I know that sounds strange, but I'm grateful for all of it. The abuse taught me what love isn't. Surviving taught me what strength really means. And Grace is teaching me what love actually is. She looked at her sleeping daughter, whose small fist was curled around a stuffed elephant. Marcus thought he was breaking me, Rebecca continued, but he was actually breaking away everything that wasn't really me. The people-pleasing, the self-doubt, the belief that I had to earn love by being perfect. All of that was stripped away. And what was left? Linda asked. Rebecca smiled. Someone I actually like. Someone who knows her own worth. Someone who'll teach her daughter that crawling is something you do when you're learning to walk, not something you do when you're begging to survive. Outside their hotel window, Chicago stretched endlessly in all directions, full of women who were fighting their own battles, making their own escapes, discovering their own strength. Rebecca Harrison had crawled across broken glass in the darkness, but she was walking into the light, and she wasn't walking alone. The baby monitor crackled softly as Grace shifted in her sleep, and Rebecca heard something that made her heart soar, her daughter's voice, strong and clear even in dreams, practicing the words she'd learned that week. Up, Grace murmured. Up, up. Rebecca smiled in the darkness. Yes, baby girl. Up. Always up from here. Rebecca's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we have more strength than we know. Her journey from victim to survivor to advocate proves that healing is possible. Justice can prevail, and no one has to face abuse alone. If Rebecca's courage inspired you today, please show your support by hitting that like button. Your engagement helps stories like this reach other women who might need to hear that they're not alone, they're not crazy, and they deserve so much better. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it, but do it carefully and safely. Sometimes the women in our lives are fighting battles we can't see. And if you want to hear more stories of survival, strength, and justice, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Every week, we share real stories of real women who refuse to let their circumstances define their destiny. Remember, you are stronger than your worst day, braver than your biggest fear, and worthy of love that lifts you up instead of tearing you down. Until next time, keep walking tall.